Welcome, everybody. Welcome. Glad to see you here. Well, this is one for the history books. My name is Tracy Metz. I'm the director of the John Adams Institute. Welcome to this evening's special event with Roger Ross Williams, Dr. Ibram X. Kendi, and Mara Brock Akil. And a special word of thanks to Netflix for making it possible for us to show clips from this film, Stamped from the Beginning, the day before the official premiere at IDFA tomorrow. There are still tickets for the screening tomorrow for the actual premiere. And if you come to one of us from the John Adams later, I'm sure we can arrange a ticket for you. But then you have to promise that you will actually go. Let me start with Roger. Roger Ross Williams has been to the John Adams twice before. The first time to talk about his film American Jail, and the second time during the pandemic about his contribution to the Netflix series Innocence Files. We are delighted to have him back again, this time to talk about Stamped from the Beginning, the film he made of Dr. Kendi's book from 2016 of the same title. Mara is joining us this evening. She's a screenwriter, the executive producer of this film. Oh, you have your own fan club already. The executive producer of the film, and in her own right, a mover and shaker in black television. You have an impressive CV. Ibram X. Kendi founded the Center for Anti-Racist Research at Boston University. His book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, sold 1 million copies. So fellow authors, eat your heart out. In an interview in the newspaper, the Dutch newspaper NRC this weekend, he talked about a number of things, a number of themes that I hope will also recur in this evening's conversation. For example, the backlash he sees after the Black Lives Matter protests of 2020, about how diversity is now seen as a threat, about how anti-racist is now interpreted as anti-white. And I hope, as I mentioned, that these themes will all return in their conversations with our moderator of this evening, Hasna El Maroudi. Welcome. As I said, the film is premiering tomorrow at IDFA at 5:30, and I'm sure you'll be very curious after this evening and the little tastes that we're able to show you. So before I give the floor to Dr. Kendi, we would like to show you the trailer of Stamped from the Beginning. Enjoy.
Good evening, everyone. I just first want to thank, of course, the John Adams, and I want to thank, of course, my colleagues, Roger and Mara. I want to thank all of you for coming this evening and hopefully coming tomorrow afternoon as well to see our film. It was about, I think, 10 years ago that I was working on the book that became Stamped from the Beginning, and that sort of research and writing and even conceptual process was quite the journey. I actually entered into this research project with a very simple recognition, and that recognition was that most people who had written on the history of racist ideas typically wrote books and texts that only documented notions of biological racial hierarchy. So eugenics or other notions that particular racial groups were biologically or genetically distinct and particular racial groups were inferior and superior. And I wanted to show through writing Stamped from the Beginning that there were other kinds of racist ideas, specifically notions of cultural and behavioral racial hierarchy that there was widespread beliefs that certain racial groups, namely people of European descent, had superior cultures, and that the job of progressives were to civilize and develop the backward, wayward, uncivilized, barbaric people of color. I wanted to show that those ideas were actually racist too. And I also wanted to show that notions of behavioral racial hierarchy were racist as well. But unfortunately, when I started writing this book, there was a very specific way in which people understood racist ideas. And again, that was only notions of biological racial hierarchy. And I found that the reason why people were defining racist ideas in that way is because typically they believed that particular racial groups were culturally and behaviorally inferior, and they wanted to exonerate themselves. And so I thought it was important to write a book that documented all the different ways in which people were identifying groups racially and perceiving them to be superior or inferior. But most specifically in this text, I wanted to document ideas that suggested that Black people or Black groups in particular were inferior. I also realized that there were a whole host of definitions, as I sort of have already alluded to. And I thought it was important that in order for us to be able to empirically and comprehensively define racism or even racist ideas more specifically, that we had to have a full picture. In other words, we had to know the full history of racism. We had to know the full history of racist ideas in order to fully be able to use a term or define it in a way that would encompass that full history. So I ended up also wanting to write a history, document a history, so that I could walk away from this book with a clear definition of a racist idea that would encompass that history. And so that was also a critical sort of purpose or objective of this text. And I ended up defining a racist idea as any notion that suggests a racial group is superior or inferior to another racial group in any way. So very simple definition. But that encompasses notions of biological, cultural, and behavioral hierarchy. But what it also does, as we will show even in the film, is as it relates to Black people, there were many different Black groups. In other words, there's racist ideas about Black women. There's racist ideas about Black men. There's racist ideas about African Americans. There's racist ideas about people from Suriname. And all these ideas are quite similar, but then there's also distinctions. And so in order to document this history, you have to document the many different ways in which people imagined different Black groups as inferior. But ultimately, as I started writing this history of racist ideas, I also decided that I wanted to explain the why. So why did these ideas emerge to begin with? So not just who constructed them, who produced them, and indeed in Stamped from the Beginning in the film, like in the book, we actually document the first producer of anti-Black racist ideas. So, but I didn't want us to just sort of document who produced these ideas, but I wanted us to really understand, I wanted the readers to understand why they produced those ideas. Because we have been taught for centuries, if not certainly for decades, that people who produced racist ideas did so because they were ignorant, they just didn't know, or they were hateful. They hated Black people. And so their ideas came out of their ignorance and hate. And that perspective has then led to solutions, right? If we're taught that the producers of racist ideas are producing them because of ignorance and hate, it's then going to lead to solutions of, okay, we need to engage in mass education of the powerful, or we need to have love circles. And that will undermine, this problem. But in documenting this history, I actually distinguished between the producers of racist ideas and the consumers. And so Stand from the Beginning really documents those who produce these ideas. And so I'm not talking about the people who were reading the scholarly treatise, but the person who was writing it. I'm not talking about those who were listening to the political speech. I'm talking about those who were giving that political speech, those who were creating the birth of the nation, those who were identifying particular groups as inferior, and then those obviously who were engaged in the mass circulation of those ideas. So then when I sort of distinguished between those who were producing the ideas from those who were consuming them, and I zeroed in on those producers, it became quite clear that many of these producers were quite powerful. Many of them were quite knowledgeable. Many of them had personal romantic relationships with black people, so they certainly didn't hate them, at least not in their bedrooms. And so what was happening was that these people were not producing these ideas because they were ignorant and hateful. What was happening, as we show, is that they were producing these ideas to defend or justify or even rationalize existing racist policies that benefited them. So in other words, you had enslavers, you had human traders who were trying to justify why they were specifically trading and enslaving black people. And those justifications became, there's something wrong with black people. They're worthy of enslavement. They're the cursed descendants of Ham. They're meant for chattel slavery. And these ideas then defended against abolitionists and others who were trying to undermine their business, trying to undermine their commerce, trying to prevent them from continuing to engage in what was benefiting them. And so we see that across the world, but particularly in the emergence of human trading and certainly slavery in the United States. And we see that still to this day. People rationalizing racial disparities by claiming those who are on the lower end of those disparities are there because there's something wrong with them, as opposed to racist policies. And so that's really the history of racist ideas in a nutshell, producing these ideas to normalize racial inequality, to normalize the impoverishment of Africa, to normalize the impoverishment of black people, to say that poverty is the result of what's wrong with black people as opposed to power and policy. So we sort of document that in the film, and certainly I've documented that in the book. Thank you.
Please give it up one more time. Good evening, everyone. My name is Hasna El Maroudi. I'm a journalist from the Netherlands, and tonight I am the moderator, and I will do my best to give you guys here as well a little bit of the floor. So if you have any questions, at the end of every segment, I will come at you, and literally come at you with this box. So I hope that you are good catchers. I am a terrific thrower. Why are you laughing? It's the truth. The microphone is in here, and if you have a question and you raise your hand, I will send the mic towards you. I would like to ask you very politely to tell us who you are and also to actually ask a question. Again, thank you so much for being here. I was one of the lucky few to get to watch the documentary in preparation. And obviously, I've also read your book, or actually listened to it. It's a long listen. And I kept on wondering where, or more how you came up with the name. So stamped from the beginning. It's, on the one hand, it's very obvious and very clear, and at the same time, by calling it stamped from the beginning, it is so powerful. Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
So that title comes from a speech that was given by a Mississippi senator by the name of Jefferson Davis on the floor of the US Senate in 1860. And this is the same Jefferson Davis who would go on to become the president of the Confederate States of America. Jefferson Davis stood up to oppose a bill that was put on the floor that would have funded the education of black children in Washington, D.C. And he basically opposed it by saying, you know, this nation was founded by white men for white men, and the inequality between the white and black races was stamped from the beginning. And then he goes on to actually prove it, which we actually show in the film, in which he imagines that black people were created before Adam and Eve with the animals, and also imagines that that origin story is in the Bible. Mm-hmm. So this is a US senator saying this on the floor of the US Senate to oppose the funding of education of black children. But I also think the term stamped from the beginning evokes that racist ideas have been stamped from the beginning of the United States. They've been stamped from the beginning of the modern world. And of course, we need to eradicate them.
Yeah. So it's also reclaiming what he said in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah. This weekend, NRC Handelsblad published, our daily Dutch newspaper, an interview with you. And in that interview, you very clearly state that you don't consider yourself an activist. Is that true? At the same time, while reading the interview, I felt that you were very much portrayed as an activist. What does that mean for the work that you do as a historian?
So I have a very specific definition of an activist. The more you read my work, the more you know I'm just big on definitions, right? And so I define an activist as someone with a record of power and policy change. And so these are individuals who are specifically not just working to shift power and policies, but have a record, right? So, I'm a scholar, right? So I haven't necessarily engaged directly in the work of seeking to shift power and policy. However, I think my work lends itself and supports many activists on the ground who are seeking to do that work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I ask you this question also a little bit selfishly from my own experience as a journalist who writes about inequality a lot. And oftentimes when people say that I'm an activist, or it's mostly meant to derail and put my work down and make it feel less important. Do you feel the same?
Oh, without question. Yeah. And so it's imagined that there is no such thing as someone who is an expert on racism. It's imagined that racism, that no one can have expertise, that it's something that we all can have, are sort of born into. We all have our opinions about. All of our opinions should be then used to shape policy, that we don't necessarily need to ground our opinions in facts and evidence. And so I'm just out here talking, just like anybody else, right? And I think one of the ways in which I'm positioned in that way is indeed by saying, oh, I'm an activist. So it's defined to say that I am advocating for a particular group, as opposed to I am expressing, based on the research, a particular set of ideas or evidence that lends itself to equality or equity or justice. And for whatever reason, though, particularly in our discourse, there are just too many beliefs that there are sort of two sides, right? Apparently, like, there's the side of justice, and then there's another side of justice. Like, we can't, that there's two truths, right? That if someone like me claims that if one makes the case that black people are lazy, that that's a racist idea, well, I'm just expressing a perspective, and people have other perspectives.
So what does that do to you personally when your work still is seen as activist rather than, well, scholarly or academic?
Well, I think it's an attempt to delegitimize my work. And I mean, I think I've faced, particularly over the last 3 years, all sorts of attempts to delegitimize, discredit me personally, in my work. And I think that, that's a part of it. And part of it, what happens is when you're not able to take someone's work and, respond to it directly, another effective way to basically undermine what they're saying is to discredit them personally, right? And we see that in politics all the time, right? There's a particular politician whose set of policies are going to benefit the vast majority of the voters, and so the opposing politician can't respond on a policy level, right? So what do? They start attacking that politician personally to delegitimate that person. Similarly, that people can't respond on a scholarly level, so they have to respond with personal attacks.
Yeah. Can you let that slide, or do you just decide to go for it and do more research and have more talks, or what is your response when people people come for you?
Well, it depends. I mean, clearly, when they come for me in this way, I just have to keep it moving and focus on the work. And then obviously that's hard, because I'm human, and people are saying all types of things. But I always have to remember the reason, what's behind that, right? And these are not people who are acting in good faith. And I need to reserve my time for responding and engaging more specifically with people who have constructive criticisms upon good faith. Because if you spend all your time with the bad faith folks, right, you're not going to really have the time and awareness for the folks who are coming in good faith.
And at the same time, people, when they take the time out to come at you, it also means that clearly you struck a nerve. You've said and written things that might change the world's view on at least this topic.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, that's my wife, the real Dr. Kendi. She always says to me there, if if no one's coming at you, you ain't saying nothing. And so that's that's certainly true. On the other hand, for me to have built a body of work that seeks to not only document the history of racist ideas and even policies, and document how these ideas and policies have harmed particularly Black people, and to say to human beings
that those policies and ideas were not just harmful, but they're wrong, and that we should see Black people as equal and as human, and they should have equal opportunity and you know, as like anyone else. What's so dangerous about that, right? But on the other hand, it is dangerous in a deeply racist society and world.
Yeah. In a bit, I would like to ask you why it is so dangerous in a deeply racist society, but I would like to see if there are any questions from the audience so far. Are there any questions? Okay, I'm gonna get up. Can you please get up and I'll throw the mic to you.
Try to catch it.
Yay!
I have two questions.
So what is your name, first of all?
Can you hear me okay? Yeah, okay. It's Pamela Armstrong Fraser. I'm an expat living in the Netherlands, originally from Washington, D.C. and California. My two questions are, what support systems do you have to keep going? Because I know people are coming at you, and I know that a lot of people are afraid to be in your position. They don't really have the courage or the willpower to do it, simply because they know that there's going to be a lot of pushback. So what are your support systems? And do you believe that people who have lived as white people all their lives, particularly in America, can ever understand the full extent of their privilege and be able to understand the harm of racism?
Thank you. So, what kind of support system do you have, apart from the real Dr. Kendi?
So I have two little girls, a 7-year-old and a 6-month-old,
Oh, wow.
who doesn't matter what's happening in the world. You know, they're either crying or smiling. And of course, my family and friends, and you know, colleagues like Roger and Mara, and at the same time, I view the suffering of Black people as a form of support. In other words, what I mean by that is it's very easy for me to not remember why I got into this work to begin with. And it could be very easy for me, as I'm getting all these attacks, to think that it's worse than what working class, impoverished Black folks are facing under the full weight of racism. And so I always try to remember that and see that and think about that and experience that, which keeps me going and keeps me fighting and writing and researching. And I think to your second question, I actually do think that white Americans and white people worldwide can begin to recognize the full scope of their privilege. And part of the reason why I think that's the case is because as a man, you know, I've been seeking to and on a journey to recognize the full scope of my privilege as a man, right? You know, as a heterosexual man. Now, people around me may tell me, well, you haven't done that yet, right? But I feel like I'm genuinely trying, I'm genuinely striving. I'm genuinely also recognizing the ways in which, you know, masculinity can be toxic, not just to the world, but even to men. And so I'm hoping that if I, as a man, can recognize that privilege, then white people, as white people, can recognize their privileges as well.
Thank you. I think your questions were very well answered. Is there any other question? Are there any other? Oh, hey, way in the back. Okay. Can you please stand up? Okay. No, no, no. Someone else can catch it and then pass it on. Ah, yeah, no. This is the game.
Hi. So I have my questions written down. My name is Cami, and I'm from Egypt. I want to know about what is your opinion on how racist ideals have been placed by colonizers and infiltrated societies in places where racism is not as apparent as the United States? I'm specifically talking from my experience in Egypt. What is your opinion on that? And I have two parts. My second question is racism a term that's been injected into places where it might not have shown up otherwise, or do you think it's a natural progression of humanity?
Ooh. Did you get them?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Should I throw it back?
Oh, you're so much better than I am.
So, do you mind if I answer your second question first? Okay. So, racism as a term only really emerged in the world in the 1930s. And so a German writer wrote a book on racism in which he sought to compare and contrast what people of African descent were facing with those who were experiencing, Jewish people who were experiencing the Holocaust. By 1940, a writer in the United States wrote a book called Race, Science, and Society. Her name was Ruth Benedict, in which she used that term. So then it became popular. So I'm mentioning that because to answer your second question, it really depends on whether we're answering the question based on the phenomenon existing or the term existing. And so if we're answering the question based on the phenomenon existing, clearly racism existed before 1930, right? Because race existed, and people were using the term race even to position or to describe groups of people as early as the early 1600s. But they were racializing people, namely and first black people, as early as the mid-1400s. And so it was the racialization of black people, the racialization of indigenous people, the racialization of Asian people, the racialization of white people. And all of these racializations were happening simultaneously, although people weren't commonly using the term race. But we now know that that's what was happening. But when the Portuguese, as we show in Stanford in the beginning, they were really the first to engage in the racialization process to basically justify their exclusive human trading of African people in the mid-1400s. And so I'm saying that to say that the human trade became a global phenomenon. Colonialism became a global phenomenon, largely carried out obviously by Europeans, and so you can't really separate racialization and racism from human trading and colonialism, even if the people who were engaging it or being subjected to it didn't necessarily have that language. And so scholars and historians of colonialism, of slave trading, of capitalism have long sort of documented the role that racism played in each. Then there was the first question, which?
The first question was more about where your origins lay in Egypt. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Did I answer the first question too?
I think you kind of answered the first question, but I think she also wants you're saying yes?
Yeah, they're connected. I just want to know more about, because in places like Egypt where race, I mean, in the United States, very apparent, right? Yeah. But in other places, that was not as apparent.
Okay.
Understand
Yeah. Could you all hear her?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, let me just say, I think that what you just stated is both true and much more complicated. So in other words, in the United States, race and racism is apparent, but if you talk to the vast majority of Americans, they'll say it's not. Mm-hmm. Right? They'll say that racism ended when Abraham Lincoln, quote, freed black people. Or racism ended when we passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Or they'll say racism ended when Barack Obama became president. And those who are but then they'll turn around and say, no, actually racism doesn't exist because those people who are producing Stand from the Beginning are the real racists, right? So on the one hand, they say racism doesn't exist, then they say those who are fighting for equality are engaged in racism. So I'm saying that to say that even in the United States, there's widespread belief that race and racism isn't a problem. There are many people who are not necessarily confronted with or taught about racism, in the way that we're talking about it, tonight. There are many people who don't really understand their own racialization. And I think that's certainly the case in other countries around the world. But I think what's distinct is, obviously, there are many, many people in the United States who have been able to break through and to document the racism in the US in ways that maybe that's circulated around the world, largely because of the American media, that may not be happening in other countries. Yeah. In other words, the racism is happening, but they may not have been able to document and shed those images and those stories around the world because of the way in which they're subjected, because of the way Western media dominates, you name it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and also to dive into that a little bit further, I'm originally from Morocco, and I see a lot of racism, anti-black racism there as well, and it's just this different complexity. It's the same, but it's, yeah. How do you look at those countries, for instance, Egypt or Morocco, where there's also this racism?
Well, first, let me just say, I think it is possible for there to be a global construction of blackness, but then blackness to operate differently in each nation because of the unique nation's history, because of the, let's say, the racial makeup of the nation, the ethnic makeup of the nation's history, its politics, it's where it's situated, on the African continent versus somewhere else. And so it doesn't have to be one or the other, right? There can be simultaneous common conceptions of darker people as uglier, or darker people as lazier, or darker people as more dangerous, while simultaneously what ugliness means, or laziness means, or dangerousness means is different in different countries. And so I suspect that's different in Morocco. Yeah. Versus what's happening in the United States, versus what's happening here in Holland, versus what's happening in Egypt.
Yeah, thank you. I know there are many more questions, and I promise I will get back to you later on, but first I would like to invite our other guests also to the stage. Please give it up for Roger and for Mara. Thank you both so much for being here with us.
Yeah.
Before I dive into the next question, I would like to show you the first clip from the documentary. So I was completely taken back by that question, and so were the interviewees, obviously. Roger, I was wondering, why this question? How did you come up with this question? How did you go about asking this question?
It is the last line, close to the last line in the book, the statement. And the statement is, the only thing wrong with black people is that you think something is wrong with black people. So in the editing process, as we were getting down to the end of our edit. We had to cut the film. We finally figured it out after years of torture trying to figure it. This is a 541-page book that we're making 90 minutes. It was hard. And I wanted to end the film the way the book ends, with that question, that statement. The only thing wrong with black people is that you think something is wrong with black people, because after you read the book, you have a different idea of what that means. I probably wouldn't understand quite what it meant just reading it until I've read Stamped from the beginning. And then we showed it to a bunch of our brilliant editorial advisors, editors, world-class editors, and one of them said to me, you should start with that as a question and then answer it in the end, so that you start the film with this question, which I loved because it shocks the audience into paying attention. They're like, oh, this film is not going to be what I think it's going to be. It's going to be provocative, it's going to be edgy, it's going to be interesting, and you've got them right away. And it was a bold decision to make, and throughout the process, I made many bold decisions like that, because I've somehow, over the years of making films, I've become much more confident in my creative decisions.
I absolutely love that for you. What kind of bold decisions did you have to make, other than this bold decision?
I made a decision early on that the only experts in this film will be black women, because black women have always been at the forefront of the resistance movement. They do the work, and they don't always get the credit. And when I looked at the list of experts, I was given a big list of experts with all the usual historians and academics, and I was looking at it, and a lot of, the usual, the Doris Kearns Goodwins, I don't know, not to call her out specifically, but the white, and I was like, but I noticed a pattern that the work around racism was being done by black women at Harvard and Stanford and Yale and Howard. And I was like, wait a minute, there's a pattern here, and this is a statement within itself to put black women only in this film, and it says something, and there was a lot of pushback. This is, again, confidence in your creative voice.
Pushback by who?
By the powers that be.
Who are those powers?
The people who pay for the film.
Oh, okay.
And I said, nope, I'm not going to fold on this. I'm not going to fold on this. And the pressure gets stronger and stronger, and they try polite, then they get more aggressive. And I was like, no. And now...
Should I ask aggressive how?
Just we would be much more happier if you did it this way. It's like you know what that means. And now they own it. Everybody owns it. Everybody's like, oh, brilliant, this is great, this is wonderful. But so if you stick to your guns, you always have to stick to your guns. It's something I learned in this process, because there's many decisions, other decisions in this film that were, I wanted to do something that had never been done before, and that was really my guiding light.
Well, the film was 3 years in the making, I think?
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, that's so long. How did you come up with also the way that it is made? So you have a narrator, you have the interviews, but you also have this historic context, and you have these images. How did that all come together? Was it, how did you start comprehending it?
It's a multi-year creative process that, you have breakthroughs in your creative journey. So you start out, David Teague, the brilliant writer who is here who wrote really Stamped from the beginning. And who's been a creative collaborator of mine. He wrote my scripted film, Cassandra, with me, and edited Life Animated, the film that was nominated for an Oscar that I did. And, you know, David started to break it down, and, you know, it was a long outline. You know, this is, and then, you know, we would start to, you know, just kind of put things together. But what I found is when we started to put it together that it was starting to feel like a history lesson, like a boring history lesson. Mm-hmm. And I actually, watching the film in the edit room, I think it was like a string out, I don't know, 3 or 4 hours the first time, I fell asleep. I've like, yeah, sort of an ADD, and I'm like, uh-oh, I'm in trouble. And so I was like, I have to have a breakthrough with this. So you get, you know, you go through like a period of like depression, because you're like, oh, this is going to be a disaster. It's going to be so boring. No one's going to want to watch this. Netflix is going to hate it. They're not going to promote it. And then I gave a scene to an editor who was working on another project, and I said, but Bacon's Rebellion, and I gave him this little scene, and I said, just go crazy. Him and Francesca, the 2 editors, and they did needle drop, and they played with time, and they fight the power, and they put everything. It was like, and I saw it, I was like, I could not. The white ballerina dancers in whiteness, like, you know, like, I was like, oh my God, this is the language of the film. This is incredible. I've got it. I've got the language of the film. And that was a big breakthrough. And then I was calling everyone. I was calling Mara. Mara, I've got it. I've got it. I was trying to leave Kendi alone because I was nervous to call Kendi all the time. And then that was like a big thing. And then I was like, I went to my office with Elisa Payne, the producer, and we were sitting there, and I was like, I've got to find a structure that is like I can get in my head, you know. And I thought, 9 lies about black people. Let's break it down to 9 lies. And the 9 lies are the 9 chapter headings throughout the film. And once I had that structure, then it became, and I had the style and I had the structure, we were cooking.
Yeah, amazing. What I also loved about it is that even though it is a history lesson in a certain way, but there's not a lot of things that are being, there's not a lot of words. So there's a lot of room for images as well to actually speak to you. Yeah.
Because racist ideas are disseminated through popular culture. That's what I learned in the book.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm like, okay, we're gonna tell this story through the images that we don't even know are infecting our minds with racist ideas, because we see them every day in television and in movies and everything we consume, in the media and newspapers, everything we consume, and we don't even know. And so that's the way to tell the story, to use those images, and you know, and then we did something else, is that we start way in the beginning, like Kendi said, like way in the beginning in Portugal. And how do you visualize, you know, Portugal in 1400s? Well, David and I were talking, and we said, we were just thinking about, the first thing we said to each other was, this has to be like nothing no one else has seen before. It has to be like a documentary, which is almost impossible, right? And then we were like, let's take actors and put them on a green screen stage, because that's what they do in The Mandalorian. We were going to reproduce the way the Mandalorian, we had Mandalorian money. So that got scaled down a bit, and then rotoscope them, paint them in the art style of the time, because that was the pop culture of the paintings, or whatever the art style was, pop culture of the time. So that's why each of the animation, which I call them little movies, are in the art style of that period.
Yeah, amazing.
It's beautiful.
And Mara, what was it like when you got the call from him? I've got it. Finally.
It was refreshing because, you know, it's funny, just as much as there are a lot of racist ideas, there's a lot of ideas to enter into the telling of the story. And you can enter the wrong way and lose everyone. You know, what's important about a film is to make people feel enough to be activated to change, even if that starts in a book. So how do we come in? And I think those 9 lies were a way for, really, it's the mirroring the essence of the receipts that are all in those 541 pages. And in those receipts, there's a structure there in the book that was refreshing and transformative for me, who I thought I was on top of my own history, where there has been a war over these racist ideas from the beginning. Mm-hmm. But we didn't know those racist ideas. So there was a point in which we were even going to structure the film. I know David's probably like, oh, it was a lot of work to think, oh, maybe we should structure the film around this idea of the warring of ideas. And that was challenging. And so when Roger said, I got it, it was refreshing because that was also long in the tooth. And it also was problematic because it's very challenging for people to identify themselves as a racist, an assimilationist, which is one of the most challenging, which I think most people fall into, and to see the problem pointed back at themselves, and then anti-racist. So that idea could also be alienating. So how do we invite everyone into the story so we can see what's really true, is that the racist ideas have affected all of us, not just white people to understand their privilege or their belief that they're superior to another group of people, but that as a Black woman, how much have I consumed these racist ideas and brought them into my own life as a way of being, as a way of moving in the world, and needing to purge that so that we don't move that forward. So that was point blank, the essence are in those 9 lies, and I think it's a way for us all to enter into a very needed conversation. One of my personal reasons for wanting to even eradicate racism is that we have, collectively, we need all of our human efforts and creativity and ideas on how to solve so many problems of the world. And so let's chip away at it. And so I think those 9 lies get us going.
And then very briefly, what are those 9 lies?
Well, I think you guys all have to come. I'm not going to tell you.
Ooh.
You have to
That's
come
right, Roger.
tomorrow.
I was about to give it up.
Oh, no. 5:30, Chazinski 1, and watch the film.
Yes.
And experience it.
Yes.
One of the striking things in the book, as well as in the documentary, is the explanation of the moment that the notion race came into, that it made its entrance. You've already spoken about it a little bit, but I would like to take a look at the next video clip, which is Early Days. It's a fight against the white elite. One of the things in the book as well, you write about the origin of the name, or of the word slave, the Slavs. Could you elaborate a little bit more about how in Europe the use of Slavs as enslaved people went towards using Black people and getting Black people from Africa to Portugal, and why that happened?
Wow, how much time do we have? I
just found that was something, even for someone who has read a lot about the topic, was totally new for me.
Yeah, in the first half of the 1400s, Western European nations, most of the people who were enslaved were from Eastern Europe and were identified as Slavs. And so they were typically Slavic peoples who were kidnapped from a whole host of traders. And, but by 1444, Prince Henry financed an exhibition to the coast of West Africa, along the coast of the Atlantic. Europeans in the sort of Western Mediterranean were enslaving and even trading African people, but they were typically buying enslaved Africans from Muslim traders who were bringing them up through the Sahara Desert. And so Prince Henry decided he wanted to go around these, quote, middle persons to the source. And he recognized that these enslaved Africans were much more valuable because there was less of them, and even it was harder for them to run away and to blend into the, obviously, Western European population. And so that's when, of course, the Portuguese really led the way in sort of growing what became known as the transatlantic slave trade. And of course, folks in this nation weren't far behind.
Yeah. Thank you for enlightening us on that bit of history. Are there any questions so far in the audience? Okay, you're super close, so this should go.
Thank you. First of all, I want to convince you I'm not a black man, I'm not a white man, I'm a human.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also a narrative analyst. And I believe that racism is a toxic cocktail.
Is there a question? Let me first, okay.
There's a toxic cocktail of various social developments. And in order to find solutions, because I think as white people, we have to admit and we also have to address that racism is a problem. But now talking about solutions. Who bears, concern to you, all of you, the moral responsibility for beating racism? Is it the individual? Is it the collective? Or is it the institute?
Good question. Can I have the mic?
Yeah.
I would say.
I said I'm good at throwing, not at catching.
I would say all of the above.
Yeah.
The individual, the collective, and the institution.
I would say, yeah. I would like to add to that, it's liberating on all fronts. I think the personal journey is just as liberating, but I think the institutional, bears more weight.
Mm-hmm. Because it can also change.
It's not just about who's currently here, it's about who are the unborn and those who are small. Our children, they are growing up our children are under extreme stress. We call it, at this point, anxiety and depression and the rates of suicide. They don't see a future. They do not. And they're afraid to say it because they love us. And we have to get about the business of that. And so when those 3 tiers, it is institutional change while we work while we liberate ourselves individually, but on a daily basis when you keep sweeping your porch, but people keep dumping dirt on it, piles of dirt on it, you can never get a clean porch. It is the institutions who bear this weight, and it's the people and how we vote, how we spend, how we talk about these issues, how we change our hearts, because the heart changes the mind. And that's what I do hope this film can begin to do.
Thank you.
And if I could just add that the reason I think it's important for us to know that institutions aren't going to change themselves, right? So we have to change institutions, because I agree fully with what Mara is saying, and so if we recognize our role as individuals and our role collectively to transform institutions, then we'll get this change, that we need and we want.
Yeah, thank you. One more question, and then we're going to move on to the next video clip.
Oh, I need to.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, that was.
This is such a great thing.
My name is Khadija Al-Mudabit, and I'm very happy to be here. Very interesting to hear you talk. I have your book. I teach teachers about inclusive education, also about anti-racism, and I have two questions. You just said that we as individuals have the, I think, obligation to do what we can do so we can change institutions, right? To me, it sounds like a very neoliberal kind of way of putting the responsibility at individuals, while you have institutions that are very hard to change from the bottom down because power is at play. How do you see what you just said, that the individuals collectively should change institutions? How should we go about that? Because there are also power dynamics at play. That's one thing. And the second question is about, you were talking about blackness. And what I learned from thinkers like Stuart Hall, black radical thought, is that blackness depends on place, time, period. You have blackened people all over the world. When you have Ndembe talking about what is Africanness on the African continent, in the African countries, and other African continental thinkers, I am curious what you think about that. Is blackness something that is that has a different reference and meaning depending on the place, time, etc.? So these are my two questions. Changing institutions from the bottom down. How could individuals do that? And what about blackness and the reference and meaning regarding to place, time, etc.?
Oh.
So I think the second question, that's what I tried to emphasize earlier, is that the way racialization happens is different. Is different all over the world. But then there are simultaneously similarities. But those differences are the result of those elements you described, and certainly blackness sort of functions and lives and operates both similarly and different in each place. I think for the first question, I do not believe that we should wait on those who are in positions of power in institutions to change those institutions. Because when you look at the history of radical change, it's largely came as a result of social movements. It's largely came as a result of resistance. And that resistance has typically started with 3 people in a room deciding that they were going to put together an organization that then galvanized people, that then led to social movements. And so, I think the neoliberal perspective is completely disregards the history of organizing, the history of people individuals gaining power through collectives. Mm-hmm. The neoliberal perspective says that you are powerful through your own individuality, which is completely, certainly disregards history, even disregards those who are in positions of power, because even individuals who are in positions of power, they're not in that power because of themselves as individuals. It's because they're associated with other individuals. They've organized people who can advocate on behalf of their interests. They have the monopoly on violence, which is based on a collective sort of force. And so, and that's why I think ultimately this is a power struggle between those who are striving to conserve racism, and those who are striving to eradicate it.
Thank you. So let's circle back to 1444, or actually make a giant leap from 1444 into the direction of the abolition, with the next clip, the video clip called American Paradox. So powerful.
So,
Sorry.
You're like, well,
something's going on.
Lene, amazing Lene, who is an incredible Instagram sensation, who has this viral series called Parking Lot Pimping, where she drinks tea and gives you history.
Gives you the tea.
Gives you the tea. And she's had like some great people on her show, like Michelle Obama and Kamala Harris. But she said Thomas Jefferson was full of shit, is what she says in that clip. But it was, I don't know what happened. It was edited. Who edited that? Who edited that?
Should it have been beeped out?
So that means folks have to go tomorrow and see that, yeah.
Yes, to get the impact.
Well, one of the other things that she says is also that Lincoln only opposed slavery because he saw how the economy could benefit from moving away from slavery. Can you tell me what she meant?
So Lincoln was what at the time was called a free soiler. So free soilers by the 1850s were advocating for land where there was no enslaved labor and there was no black people, right? So they were, and they felt, like Lincoln, that white laborers would be able to benefit, would be able to receive higher wages, would be able to receive better access to land if there weren't enslavers who were taking the land and if there weren't enslaved people who were driving down wages. So he advocated for free soil, which was obviously the removal of slavery, but also the removal of black people.
Then how come this narrative or this idea of Lincoln, but also Jefferson, of being part of abolition, survived for such a long time? Is that something?
Well, I think we're clear on Jefferson. He has birth. I mean, also that's in there is, you know, he consistently raped Sally Hemings and had all these children, you know, whose his descendants are around today. You know, he's writing the Declaration of Independence, but he's raping a young black girl. His Sally Hemings' brother, James, another one of my shows called High on the Hog. James Hemings, get a plug in there, which premieres November 22nd. James Hemings was his slave chef, who is really the father of modern day, you know, American cuisine. Brought the stove to America, French fries, created macaroni and cheese, all those American staples. He would re-enslave. He wanted him to cook for him. So while he was writing, he would send, because if you were in Philadelphia, where he wrote, for 6 months you were free. He would send them every 6 months back down to Montreal to be re-enslaved, so he could keep him enslaved to him. So he's writing the Declaration of Independence. He's enslaving. I mean, besides
those are some good French fries.
No, I mean, this guy could cook. You watch High on the Hog, you'll see. He could cook. And he's raping, you know, the enslaved.
But then how does it work that somehow still Jefferson is seen as, well,
Because the story that we tell.
Who is the one who tells those stories?
Who tells the story, writes the history, and can erase what is true. I think that's just what it is. And so we were, you know, when you guys go to the film tomorrow, see the film tomorrow, it's funny to, not funny, it's not funny. It's when you see the number of clips that you realize I have been indoctrinated with that narrative, you know. Sneak peek, you know, it's on Sesame Street. It's in our, you know, it's in, you know, our textbooks. It's repeated generation after generation after generation, and then we just keep telling the story over and over and over and over and over. It's just a story that we tell in America, that these were the founders of our freedom. And we keep telling it, and we keep believing it until someone says, wake up.
Thomas Contradiction Jefferson. That's what Kendi calls him.
It's kind of humbling, right?
What?
To realize how many lies that we've been, you know, we most recently call it fake news in a lot of ways, right? Mm-hmm. But that's fake news.
Yeah. And do you believe that that we're at a point now where all these lies or all these stories are better recognized for what was actually going on? Or are we still at the time where we need these documentary and we need to continue telling the narrative? What is the status in the United States when it comes to knowing about, for instance, Jefferson? And you really want to answer the question. I see you going, tell me.
They're in America, in the United States, there's a huge effort to erase history, to erase slavery, and this man here is one of the most banned authors in America. But you can't ban Netflix.
Yeah, so they're trying to ban, they actually have banned your books.
Oh, yeah.
Trying to, trying to decide who writes the history, basically. Mm-hmm. We have another video clip that I would like to show you, which is also about whose stories are told and whose stories are being erased. And you've already, Roger, spoken a little bit about it, but let's watch Ida B. Wells.
That's just a little bit of tiny piece of the Ida B. Wells section. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah, it's much longer and it's real good. You've already said a little bit about the choices that you've made for the documentary using women, black women, but I would also like to dive a little bit more into the role of women of color and black women in the struggle for rights and recognition, such as Ida B. Wells. Can you elaborate a little bit more about that?
I'd love to, in that when I read the book, I cried often when I read the book, because it's clear, while living as a black woman in America, you know how devalued we are to the point of invisibility. And what's interesting in reading the book is that those women use that invisibility as power. Because they decided not to weep, they decided to write. Phyllis Wheatley, Harriet Jacobs, who are also documented in the film, they wrote so that the receipts would be there the day that Dr. Kendi decided, let me go put some facts and figures to these racist ideas and the history around it. Ida B. Wells was collecting what's now one of the most profitable industries is data. She was literally collecting data in the time in which lynchings were happening and why, and that there was a different narrative in the film. I don't want to go deeper into it because I really do want people to see the film. I think the film articulates the point in a very poignant way but she was telling the truth about what those numbers meant and why those killings were happening, and then what was the narrative around it to justify the lynchings of Black men. And so I honor those women who are also mothers who watch their children perish, die, struggle, who watch their men. What's interesting in the book, too, there's patterns in the book. So in the book, it shows you the pattern of women who literally wrote and documented the stories. Some of our Black men who were fighting as anti-racist were often murdered. And so Black women have always been anti-racist for the very reason of wanting to keep their men alive, keep their children alive, because they are their hearts, and keep themselves alive.
Yeah. Would you like to add on that? Good.
I have spoken.
Right. The Black woman has spoken. The Black woman has spoken.
I want to say, too, we've had a lot of fun on this, even though it was a lot of hard work. And one of the things I do want to shout out are the women. You know, Dr. Kendi sits in the center of this scholarship. Roger sits in the center of this vision. But when you see our Zoom calls, they are full of women, Black women, all races of women, but I want to say a lot of Black women with the intentionality and the care of carrying this story forward. And so I just want to shout them out.
Good. Then I would like to open up for a last round of questions. You were standing up immediately, so.
There's Jennifer. That was perfect.
Thank you. Can you hear me? My name is Jennifer Tosh. Many of you might know me. I am the founder of Black Heritage Tours in Amsterdam and New York, a culture historian, storyteller, time traveler. I had the privilege today of sharing the tour journey with Dr. Kendi and Roger and Mara and the team. I'm going to be a little bit of an agitator in my question, because what I'm missing right now in the conversation is centering the Dutch context. We love to be on the periphery. Oh, this is an American problem. We don't do race. We don't see color. We're colorblind. But this narrative, this history, is directly connected to our story. And what I want us to do, because what we tend to do here as a dual citizen born in the US, my family's been in the Netherlands for 4 generations, is it's nice that we can say we have racism without racists. The gentleman positioned himself as human, and that's a very privileged position to state, as you can say that. But for non-white, non-European others, that statement would not stand. So I want us to also agitate in this country how this connects to our histories. What do we do to make sure that the film doesn't get seen as an American film that has no context in the Netherlands? Let's bring it home.
Yes.
Beautiful question. Thank you so much. So, how can we bring it?
You know what? I have a suggestion. I've never been to Amsterdam before. This is my first day. I haven't had 24 hours here. And
what do you think?
First of all, it is a stunning city. It is beautiful. It is gorgeous. I get a lot of it in the quickness of being here. But because, Jennifer, I started my journey here on that tour, I would advocate that most people enter into this place on that tour. It makes you see different. You know, you can come in, you know, to be honest, I'm just being real. You know, I've always heard about Amsterdam. You heard about the weed, and you heard about the red light district. That's what you hear. You know, that's like it's like the fun city. It's like, you know, it's walkable, bikes. Oh, it's so clean. Like I hear those things. No, I'm just being, like, as the kids say, 100. And I think it would be, you know, as beautiful and civilized as it is, and organized and all of that, maybe there is an effort that tourism encourages your tour, Jennifer. Mm-hmm. That's what I would say. To see the city, because if I could, Roger, you and I were saying, like, it makes you have to walk around these streets knowing that, as well as appreciating the bakeries and the flower shops.
When you did the tour, were you already aware of...
No, I was not.
She didn't even know what Black Pete was.
Yes.
Black Pete was.
And I was floored. I mean, and then I heard it. I heard that sometimes the film festival was in alignment with that time, and I hear, like, you know, it is humbling to hear that a week from now I won't be here, that the streets will be inundated with those images, and I would probably weep. I would never come back here. But now I understand. I mean, not to say even though I understand it, one thing I know is I will avoid it. But that's a lot of pain. It's a lot of pain, and and really, the exquisite presentation around their shops and the dining and I want some of that, but I wouldn't want to eat. I don't know how I could eat having seen those images in real life, walking past them. That would be very painful. So that's just from a outsider. But my suggestion to your question, in a very real way, about what can we actively do now that we know what we know, and maybe enter in through that truth, that pain.
And I would encourage people to think about, when they think about those who are in positions of economic, political, and cultural power in this country. Are they representative of the population? And then if that's not the case, how do people rationalize that? Like, do they rationalize that by saying, well, the best people are in the best positions? Because then if that's how it's rationalized, and you're also saying what? That, let's say if Black people are underrepresented, then it's because there's something wrong with Black people. That's essentially what's being said. If people see the disparity and don't see a problem, then what they're also saying is they see a problem in Black people. But they may not recognize that consciously. Who is any particular group under or overrepresented in prisons, in poverty? And again, why? If you were to ask yourself, why is that the case, right? And how can that be without efforts to change that? Then what's likely the case is there's practices and policies that created it that are racist, and then there are ideas that normalize it. That's how racism operates all over the world. And if it's operating, if that's the case here, in other words, you have those disparities because of the policies and practices, and then the ideas are normalizing it, then you have racism. That's what's happening in the US, that's what's happening in other countries.
Thank you. Let me see. Yeah, we're going over time, so one more question.
Make it good. Whoever asked who has the best question? Which one of you have the best question here? Oh,
okay. Who has one question?
This guy is really this guy, 2 hands. He may have the best question.
Okay, here comes.
Oh no. Okay, yeah.
Hello, everyone. I hope I have the best question.
Yeah.
First of all, thank you for being here. Thank you for this film. Thank you for the book. I have both anti-racism and I have Stand From the Beginning. I'm an educator. I'm a father. I have a boy and a girl. So I needed these books in my life. So I appreciate all of your work, and I appreciate all of the work we're going to do forward. My question is, how can everyone in this room, obviously we're going to go see the film, obviously we're going to stream it on Netflix, but how can we continue this conversation? How can we improve upon, and what is our next step or advice in terms of being able to apply what we see in Stamped? I'm going to apply it in my classroom. I'm going to apply it with my friends who are here with me today. How do we apply some of the tenets? I remember in reading in this book here, some of the ideas that you have in the back. How do we apply those so that we can be not only better individuals, but be better then with our larger organizations to stamp out racism in a way that's going to be effective for all of us and for all our benefit?
Good question.
Oh, yes.
Good final question. I knew it. I knew you were the one.
Okay, so go.
Oh, me?
Yeah.
You know, what's great is that when we've been screening this now since the Toronto Film Festival premiere in September, was it September?
Early September.
Early September. What's interesting is at festivals, and then I've had friends who bring their parents, and their parents are conservative, and they've told me they've had hours of conversation afterwards. You know, what we are trying to really work out now, I think, as a team is what is the engagement and outreach around this film, and how do we continue the conversation. Obviously, you can watch the film is a way in and then read the book, but there are other ways to engage that I've just really started thinking about that, and putting together sort of a council of advisors who can help us figure out how do we continue to have these conversations. And also the good thing about Netflix is that they make it available for free to all educational or institutions. So you can stream it for free to your classroom. That's part of the Netflix thing, right, Zana?
Now it is.
Now
I don't know where she is. She's still here.
She said yes.
Okay, she said yes.
With Dutch.
With Dutch. Oh yes. Oh, the other thing about Netflix is how many languages is it?
20 dubbed and 40 subbed.
20 dubbed, 40 subbed. That's
yeah, it's a lot.
So yeah, it will be available in.
So do you have any other advice?
I have two thoughts. I think it should be, the way that book clubs are used. I think that, and book clubs meet, over time. It's not just one, it's not one meeting. I would encourage a group of people of disparate backgrounds of coming together and having the hard conversations. I don't, likely in those conversations there might be literal policy changes coming up, for vote, or within the school systems or whatever. There should be probably action items happening alongside these conversations as you sort of break down the film. And you could probably break them down in the 9 lives. That's fun. That's off the hip. But the one thing I really want to say is I really hope more than anything, and I kind of feel like I should. Dr. Kendi has talked about this, and since the day he said it, I've been thinking more and more about it. I really want Black people to love themselves. I want them to take a deep breath, and I think that's what I meant earlier when I said the liberation of the individual, that for us to stop carrying the weight of the racism that we did not create. So I would like that.
And then a final word for you. What would you advise?
Well, I mean, we end the film talking about an anti-racist society and what how we could build it, what it could be like. And I think that can be certainly a North Star. So obviously it's important for us to know our history. It's important for us to know ourselves. It's important for us to do this internal work. But we should also be seeking to create something, construct something, build something anew. And we should not just be seeking to unlearn ideas, but to learn. What does it mean to truly recognize racial equality? Like, what does it mean to recognize and level difference as opposed to rank differences? What does it mean to create a society where those who have the greatest needs get the most resources? Like, what does that mean? How do we create that? And I think that obviously necessitates a lot of conversation, as we're talking about, and obviously a lot of policy change and power change. And I was actually going to mention about Black people loving ourselves, but I also think that I don't think white people worldwide have really reckoned with how much their own personal identity is shaped by constructions of whiteness, and how much that construction of whiteness prevents white people from connecting to humanity. In other words, recognizing that when you recognize that you are part and parcel of humanity, in other words, you're not over humanity, right? It allows you to really be able to connect to people who don't look like you, who have kinky hair, who have dark skin, and to see yourself in them. And it's whiteness that prevents that, right? And when you're not able to see yourself in other human beings, that creates all sorts of problems. But not just societal problems, personal problems. That I think hopefully this film and this work will liberate those folks from. So I think it's liberating all the way around, right? I think it will liberate, really all of us, because, we've all been told a lie about ourselves and other people.
Ooh.
Can I get a big applause for Mara, for Roger, and for Dr. Kendi?
Wow, thank you. Gotta get a picture. I'm gonna get a picture. Amazing. Thank you. We love it. Okay. All right.
Just a final word. Thank you all indeed, also from me, for this incredibly insightful and thought-provoking evening. We will indeed suggest that our book club dialogues do the book and the film together. Thank you for the suggestion, Mara.
You're welcome.
Yeah. We have 50 tickets for the premiere tomorrow, and we're happy to hand them out if you go. But who has the tickets? Okay. Would you hand them out, or shall I do that?
Whatever you want, but you have to go if you take a ticket.
You have to go. If you come, you can't get a ticket and not go. Okay. Claire Ann, could you stand up in the light so that everybody knows that they're looking for you for their ticket? Yay! And a final word on upcoming events at the John Adams. Soon, Walter Isaacson on his biography of Elon Musk. I hope you have tickets, because if you don't, you're too late. We are thrilled to be doing a literary event again soon. Miriam Taves on Tuesday, November 28th, whose book Women Talking was made into an Oscar-winning film. And we're starting off next year's, no doubt, turbulent schedule of activities with Franklin Foer on his biography of Joe Biden, The Last Politician. So there will be lots to experience next year at the John Adams. We will now sign up for our newsletter, come outside and have a drink, and go get a signature from Dr. Kendi at the book table of our partner Atheneum. Thank you for joining us.
We could ask for